Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Wednesday, the 14th of September. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 203 of the illegal Russian war of aggression. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. President Zelensky has said about 8,000 square kilometres have been liberated so far, apparently all in the northeastern region of Kharkiv, and stabilisation measures have been completed in about half of that territory. The Ukrainian presidential advisor Alexei Arestovich held out the prospects of building on the gains made over the weekend in the Kharkiv region by moving on the eastern province of Luhansk. The General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces warned that Russian forces were continuing to loot as they withdrew from occupied territories. On a stretch of highway heading into Russian territory, Ukrainian officials spotted civilian vehicles with license plates from the Kharkiv region, driven by Russian military and weighed down with looted belongings. In the south, there were reports of Russian occupants breaking the gates of private garages and taking cars, as well as removing furniture. Russia has probably used Iranian-made uncrewed aerial vehicles in Ukraine for the first time, according to the UK Ministry of Defence intelligence report issued today, after Kyiv reported downing one of the UAVs Shahed 136 on Tuesday. The device is a one-way attack weapon, the MOD said, and has been used already in the Middle East. The shooting down of the drone near the front line in Ukraine suggests that Russia is using the weapons as a tactical weapon rather than a strategic one, targeting military installations deeper into Ukrainian territory. One person was killed and a number more injured by Russian shelling in the Zaporizhia Oblast in southern Ukraine over the past 2 days. 5 civilians were killed and 16 more wounded in the Bakhmut in the Donetsk Oblast yesterday. Ursula von der Leyen also sent a strong signal over European Union expansion, saying that the EU is not complete without Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and the Western Balkan countries. You are part of our family. You are at the future of our union. Our union is not complete without you, she said. Russian oil and gas revenues have fallen to their lowest for almost a year, despite a big rise in prices. Pope Francis, at a summit of religious leaders in Kazakhstan, has said that God does not guide religions towards war, in what appears to be an implicit criticism of the Russian Orthodox Patriarch Kirill, who has backed the invasion of Ukraine. And the White House said that the United States is likely to announce a new military aid package for Ukraine in the coming days. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined this evening by Maureen Watt, who is a retired politician and former Minister for Mental Health in the Scottish Government. Maureen was the member of the Scottish Parliament representing the constituency of Aberdeen South and North Kincardine from 2011 to 2021, when she retired. She previously served as a regional MSP for North East Scotland between 2006 and 2011. Maureen has also been a teacher and a councillor, amongst many other roles. Maureen, good evening. Fit like?
Nae bad, Andrew. Foo's yourself?
Nae bad either. Thank you for asking. Maureen, it's great to see you this evening, and thank you for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland this evening. Our first story
You're
this
welcome.
evening is that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited the front line of the war today when he toured the northeastern city of Izium, which Ukrainian forces liberated last week as part of their stunning counter-offensive. President Zelensky said that he was very shocked but not surprised by the scale of the damage to the city. He thanked the paratroopers who took part in Izium's liberation and watched as the Ukrainian flag was raised in front of its gutted administration building. Our blue and yellow flag is already flying in deoccupied Izium, and it will be so in every Ukrainian city and village. We are moving in only one direction, forward towards victory, he declared. The president held a minute's silence for Ukrainian soldiers who died in recent fighting. He said the scene of destroyed buildings and killed people were reminiscent of Bucha a Kyiv suburb where the Russian army executed hundreds of civilians in February and March. Tank carcasses with the Russia's signature Z symbol dotted streets covered with craters. There were dozens of bombed apartment buildings in the debris-strewn city centre. The Russians turned the inside of a church into an improvised hospital and have blown up bridges as they left. The president's secret trip underscored the dramatic success of Ukraine's advance since the beginning of this month. The Kremlin's most prestigious battalions fled in the wake of an overwhelming Ukrainian assault. Since taking Izium in April, Russia has transformed the city into a major garrison and giant arms depot. At least 1,000 inhabitants were killed during this period, Ukrainian officials have said. So, Maureen, there are dozens of bombed blocks of flats in the city centre in Izium. The Russians had turned the church into a hospital and blew up bridges. There's video now of pulverised high-rise apartment blocks, trashed schools, and burnt-out Russian military vehicles, and at least 1,000 of the city's inhabitants have been killed. Now, we know that the death and destruction that any invading army leaves behind, but do you think, is there going to be much of Izium or any other occupied city or town? Is there going to be much left?
It doesn't look, Andrew, does it? I mean, and this is where you just wonder what exactly Putin's is about. I mean, if he wants to take it to be part of, surely you would leave it pretty intact rather than destroying. But now that so much has seemed to be destroyed that they didn't manage to win in the first few weeks, shows now that their policy is completely slash and burn. That you're making advances and re-territory, but I don't want people to get enthusiastic, because there's no doubt that Putin under circumstances doesn't want to lose here. So I enjoyed the fact that there was a media blackout in recent days and weeks, and it's only kind of surfaced now. But I think should just be a bit more cautious. Advances continue, but say you never know what to do, so it's really worrying.
That's a very good point, Maureen. Thank you. And the war is certainly not over by any stretch of the imagination. But thinking about the progress that Ukrainian forces and the Ukrainian people have been making in recovering their territory that had been invaded, if they continue to make progress and their successes continue, how do you think it is that that the cities that have been destroyed and the lives that have been damaged and the infrastructure that's been hit, how do you feel? How do you think that the rebuilding of Ukraine? How do you think it should be rebuilt, and who do you think should pay for it?
Well, first of all, I think that obviously the success have due to the vast amounts of weaponry that the West is supplying them with, and I think that obviously will need to continue. And I hope all the countries of the West are still willing to do that. Thereafter, you envisage that there will probably have to be some sort of Marshall Plan for Ukraine as that country tries to rebuild itself. And I think if the war has taught us anything, it is how important Ukraine is to the world economy, the amount of goods that it supplies worldwide. So I think there will have to be mass investment to help Ukraine recover and things to go back to a bit of normality. But it's going to take decades, isn't it, Andrew?
I think so. I think you're absolutely right, Maureen, given the scale of the destruction that we're seeing and the impact. But let's look at the war in Ukraine from a slightly different perspective for our next item this evening, because Ukraine has consolidated its control of the Kharkiv region, raising flags on towns and villages occupied by Russian troops for 6 months, and reclaiming areas seized by Moscow on the first day of Vladimir Putin's invasion. The State Border Service in Kyiv said it had liberated the city of Vovkhansk, a couple of kilometres from the international border. Russian soldiers left on Sunday, it added. In the space of a few days, Ukraine has pushed the Russians out from more than 6,000 square kilometres of territory, including zones in the south of the country where a separate counter-offensive is ongoing to recapture the city of Kherson. Russian units have fled in disarray. Sergei Haidai, the governor of Luhansk, said local partisans had raised the Ukrainian flag over the key town of Kremina, which was completely empty. Its Russian occupiers had either left the area or were too scared to take the flag down, he suggested. Russian battalions have fallen back to new positions east of the Oskil River, about 10 miles from the freshly liberated city of Izium. The city was almost entirely destroyed, and as I've said, more than 1,000 residents killed during 5 months of occupation and in recent fighting, according to Kyiv. There were claims on Tuesday that Russian intelligence officers and military commanders had begun to evacuate from Crimea and to urgently resettle their families in the wake of recent battlefield events. Kyiv's main intelligence directorate said employees working for the SFB, that's the spy agency which Vladimir Putin used to run, have been quietly moving their relatives back to the territory of the Russian Federation. They have also been selling their flats, the directorate claims. Until recently, the possibility that Ukraine might take back Crimea had appeared remote. But a series of mysterious and devastating Ukrainian strikes over the summer on Russian aerodromes and weapons dumps, as well as the collapse of Russian forces in the Kharkiv region, has resulted in thousands of Crimean residents fleeing. So, Maureen, we were saying before the war is not over yet. It's perhaps not even a turning point. But some people have said that this moment, the moment itself, has power. And of course, Kyiv has confirmed that the amount of territory taken back this week is about half the size of Wales. Do you think, in terms of the apparent successes and the apparent losses suffered by the Russian forces in occupied Ukraine, do you think that this is at least the war entering a new phase?
Well, I think if what you've said about Crimea has been confirmed and the Russian occupiers selling their flats and moving out, I think that is significant. Thought to myself that when Ukraine take Crimea, to me that would be when they have won. And I hope they're not overstretching themselves, going down by Donbass, but also coming from Odessa and in. Maybe that's a tactic to in the middle. But I think what's happened in Crimea seems to me to be very significant. With occupiers selling their flats, really does seem to signal that something major is beginning to happen. And I just hope that the unions can capitalize on all that. But they have been such tactical fighters so far that I don't need to be too worried about it. Also, in terms of timing, Andrew, it's really important that as much territory is regained before the bad weather in the winter sets in. Otherwise, we're going to have we could end up having a prolonged stalemate through the winter months. So, fingers crossed, everything crossed.
Thanks, Maureen. It certainly seems that some people think that Ukraine will seek to recover Crimea as well. Crimea's Moscow-appointed leader, Sergei Aksyonov, appears to be a bit rattled. In a video address on Monday, he's now threatening locals with prosecution if they listen to Ukrainian music or chant Ukrainian slogans. But let's leave Crimea and Kyiv and move instead to Strasbourg for our next item, because the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, has insisted Putin will fail and Europe will prevail, as she vowed to press on with Ukraine's EU integration. Addressing the European Parliament, the EU Executive President issued a rallying call intended to unite member states grappling with an energy crisis as winter draws near. Ursula von der Leyen described the Russian invasion as not only a war on Ukraine, but a war on our economy, a war on our values, and a war on our future. Dressed in the blue and yellow colours of Ukraine's national flag, the Commission President announced she would visit Kyiv later today and planned detailed discussions with Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky on ensuring Ukraine's seamless access to the single market. Ukraine's First Lady, Olenka Zelenska, was among the audience in Strasbourg and was given a standing ovation by MEPs. Ursula von der Leyen also promised to work with Olenka Zelenska on the reconstruction of Ukrainian schools and pledged €100 million in EU funds. An estimated 70 schools have been damaged or completely destroyed by Russia. The European Commission President, who has already visited Kyiv twice since the outbreak of the war, also said the EU would stay the course with its sanctions on Russia. The sanctions are here to stay, she said. This is the time for us to show resolve, not appeasement. So, Maureen, firstly, addressing the Parliament, Ursula von der Leyen described the Russian invasion as not only a war on Ukraine, but a war on our economy, on our values, and a war on our future. Was the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen correct with that description?
I think it's come to mean that. I'm not sure that when Vladimir Putin set out on this, that he realized the total and utter consequences throughout the whole world that his invasion of Ukraine would have. I think he just saw it as regaining territory of the old Soviet Union. However, I'm a real pro-European, but I just wonder whether Ursula von der Leyen's speech today really was what people want to hear. I mean, that was it. To me, it sounded somewhat aggressive and expansionary, unnecessarily so at this time. It's up to the Ukrainian people and all the people of the other countries that you mentioned whether they want to join the EU or not. But also, you need to keep all the people that are already members of the EU in the tent. And, everybody's suffering at the moment, partly because of Ukraine, well, mostly in other countries because of Ukraine. Here we've got Brexit as well. But I just would caution Ursula von der Leyen on being so expansionist and inflammatory, I would say, to Putin at the moment. Things are, to me, are too delicate to be quite so right at the moment.
Well, you anticipated my next question. Actually, I was reflecting when I was reading this story that in a sense, is there a prospect that the EU would balance the involvement? I'll start again. We've been speaking already about the heavy involvement of NATO members in providing very sophisticated weapons to the Ukrainians to assist with their defence and retaking the country. Now, in light of that, is the EU and the speech that Ursula von der Leyen made today, is the EU operating as a balance on the involvement of NATO members, or is it amplifying the situation, amplifying Russian concerns and making things worse in a political sense?
It could be perceived as making things worse, I think. Putin and the Soviets, some of the Russians regard the West as like that themselves, expansionist and wanting to take more territory and be in charge of more things. And we've got to kind of counterbalance that, not in the same way as Putin is, but in other ways, because, we want to show that democracy is what people want and what people need, rather than dictatorship under Putin and in China. And I think we've talked before, Andrew, about how democracy in many countries is fragile, and in some countries in the Middle East, people don't think that democracy is necessarily all it's bigged up to be. So, I think that there has to be some balance and some very careful talk here. You're in the center of things. We're not looking at balance sheets and all that kind of things. But it's just the kind of jaw rather than war kind of thing. And as I say, it's really important that populations are taken along with you as leaders, chart a course rather than being dogmatic about things, I think.
Thank you, Maureen. That's very good advice. We'll move to our next item now, because Keir Starmer has said that people who wish to protest against the monarchy should respect those mourning the Queen and not ruin their opportunity to express their private thanks. Amid controversy over a small number of protesters being removed by police or arrested, the Labour leader told BBC Breakfast the right to protest and disagree was a British tradition, but he called for it to be done in the spirit of respect. Sir Keir Starmer's comments came as the campaign group Republic wrote to police forces to raise concerns about the arrests of anti-monarchy protesters in recent days, and to serve notice that it expects protests before the coronation to be allowed to go ahead peacefully. The head of a staff association representing rank-and-file police in London admitted earlier today that some officers had apparently not been fully aware of what people could do when it came to peaceful and legal protests. So, Maureen, when he was talking to the BBC this morning, Sir Keir Starmer said, "Respect the fact that hundreds of thousands of people do want to come forward and have that moment. Don't ruin it for them." Now, it struck me that respect is a word which has dropped in value even faster than the pound has recently. There's little respect for the wishes of Scots voters. There's no respect for asylum seekers. Johnson had no respect whatsoever for the law, and arguably had no respect for the Queen when he tried to prorogue Parliament. So does Keir Starmer saying respect carry any weight at all nowadays? Does Keir Starmer carry any weight?
Well, I think in these other contexts that you mentioned, no, the word respect doesn't seem to carry any weight. I mean, in the context of the death of the Queen, I haven't been on in recent days on your programme, but I think it's just so OTT. It's just unbelievable. And the number of things that have to be cancelled, including the ridiculous idea that somebody in the middle of their holiday in Centre Parks need to go away for a day and then come back. That just tipped it even more over the top for me, and I've just stopped watching anything. But, if you cannot protest when there are hundreds of thousands of people around, when can you get your point across really well? And obviously it's going to upset people, and I do fear for the safety of some of the protesters. They're very brave to go out, but the idea that you cannot protest at any events and events like this, to me, does smack of, was it Mary Back talked about a fascist state? It gets into really difficult territory. I am all for the police taking the protesters away if they think the situation is getting too unstable. But really, charging folk for protesting breach of the peace, I hope these are quietly dropped in the weeks and months ahead.
Thank you, Maureen. Yes, I think that story is going to run now that there's been so much comment and so much controversy with regard to the steps that certainly the Metropolitan Police and to an extent Police Scotland have been taking over the last few days. However, let's move on to our next item now, because a civil service trade union has criticised the decision to notify King Charles's staff of their redundancies during the period of mourning as nothing short of heartless. It had been reported on Monday that up to 100 employees of the King's former official residence, including some who had worked there for decades, received notification that they could lose their jobs following his accession to the throne. Mark Serwotka, the General Secretary of the Public and Commercial Services Union, said, While some changes across the households were to be expected, as roles across the royal family change, the scale and speed at which this has been announced is callous in the extreme, least of all because we do not know what staffing the incoming Prince of Wales and his family might need. He added that the union, which represents some palace workers, was working to ensure staff have full job security, and that it continued to support other royal staff concerned that their futures are now thrown into turmoil by this announcement at this already difficult time. So, Maureen, I was really quite confused by this story. I understand the legal aspect about employment law. However, as Mark Sawatka was saying and was implying, King Charles and Camilla's offices will move to Buckingham Palace after the death of the Queen, and his staff and their staff had been expected to transfer. And so, isn't that what you would expect as we see the House of Windsor as the royal family reshuffling? After all, Prince William has been rebranded the Prince of Wales and is clearly now expected to carry on with his father's campaigning. Princess Beatrice has been promoted to Councillor of State, so she'll probably need some staff too now. So it seems very, very odd that some of the royal household are being picked on in this way and are being told that they may receive their jotters at the same time as the service was taking place at St Giles yesterday.
It just, I just couldn't believe the story when I read it. It's unbelievable that everything else has shut down virtually, and yet the palace manages to put out redundancy notices to people that they expect to come out of Clarence House and watch the coffin as it goes past. I mean, as you say, there are plenty other jobs coming around. I'm sure there will be members of the Queen's staff that will want to retire, for example. So, I mean, talk about insensitivity in terms of doing it now before the Queen is even buried. Just seems to me utterly, utterly insensitive. That's not as strong a word as I'm looking for, but it's just unbelievable that Charles will have given the go-ahead for that to happen now. I presume he's given the go-ahead for something like this. Otherwise, the person who did it at the moment deserves their jotters right away, and there will be a space there. So, as you said, there are many other minor royals stepping up to the plate to take on other roles, and they will need positions. And, there could be transfers rather than large-scale redundancies. And, surely to goodness, people could have been offered early retirement and deployment elsewhere rather than immediately serving so many people redundancy notices. Utterly contemptible, really.
Thanks, Maureen. It did strike me, well, firstly, as extremely callous, but secondly, as really quite unusual. I think it's widely regarded that the messaging from the royal household over the past week has actually been very sensitive and has been widely regarded as being successful. So this seems seems completely discordant and in that context really very unusual. But I'm sure it's a story that's going to continue, and I suspect that we will come back to once the full implications are understood. But let's move on now to our next item, because businesses may face a delay of several weeks in accessing the financial support promised to them by Liz Truss to help ease the burden of spiralling energy bills this winter, Downing Street has now admitted. Amid reports that the package for businesses would not be in place by the 1st of October, the Prime Minister's spokesperson said there could be a delay of weeks, but insisted companies would receive backdated payments. They said this was not due to the 10-day national mourning period after the Queen's death, but because businesses did not have a price cap system, unlike households, meaning that a brand new scheme was going to have to be constructed. The government has contacted energy firms and their representatives to urge them not to cut off the supplies of companies unable to pay their energy bills if the support does take longer to arrive than hoped. Companies across many sectors of the economy have warned for weeks that they may not survive the winter as a result of soaring energy bills. with fixed price tariffs coming to an end and quarterly rent bills looming for many at the end of the month. Pubs and brewers are among those raising the alarm that any delay in the government's support package could force more businesses to close, triggering deep job losses. So firstly, Maureen, amid reports that the package will not be in place by the 1st of October, the Prime Minister's spokesperson has admitted that there could be a delay of weeks. A delay of weeks, and then said that they insisted that companies would receive backdated payments. A backdated payment's not going to be much help if you've already ceased trading and have closed the business, is it?
And that's happened already to many companies. Near to my old office, there was a very good Chinese takeaway, and they've shut already. So things are happening now, and the fact that Liz Truss and our government don't understand that just shows how remote they are. I mean, businesses probably haven't got any goodwill left with their banks after COVID. And this, on top of that, means that they won't be able to borrow to tide them over till the government decides what they're going to do. And, to say it's not due to the period of mourning and the recess for party conferences that's coming after that. I mean, goodness knows how. I haven't tallied up how many weeks it is that there's going to be no government on the go at Westminster. It is because of that, because there'll be nobody there to sign it off. But surely Liz Truss could say in the meantime, there should be a moratorium on energy companies, as you said, Andrew, cutting people off. That could happen surely right away if Liz Truss gave the signal for that, just as they can't, energy companies can't cut off household bills. So that could be happening until this is sorted out. But the fact that it's taking so long just shows what a nutter failure so far this new government is in the face of such a crisis facing the country.
Thanks, Maureen. And that's a good point that you make. As I said, the government apparently has contacted energy firms to urge them not to cut off the supplies of companies unable to pay their energy bills. So does that imply that in return for the blank cheque worth billions of pounds, which the former Shell employee Liz Truss wants to give to energy companies, rather than giving the money to actual people and actual small businesses, does that imply that those energy businesses are going to be expected to swallow unpaid bills in the meantime? And if I say expected, why should they not be required to swallow unpaid bills if they are getting such unlimited government support?
And this is where I think I said at the beginning that it's kind of obvious that Liz Truss and our ministers have managed to take calls and see big business and are putting them at the front and centre of everything, and just totally not understanding the crisis that small businesses, the backbone of England, that was said, are facing at the moment. Just imagine if you're a small business and wanting to build up your stock pre-Christmas. How are you going to be able to get that loan from the bank if you're in debt to an energy company? I mean, they just don't seem to understand how small businesses work, and don't seem to want to know how small businesses work. So, I mean, they say the country is in recession, but I think it's because of things like this that can push the country further into recession. And I know unemployment is low at the moment, very low at the moment. But you can't see that staying low with so many businesses facing the brink.
Absolutely, Maureen. Thank you. And you make a very good point. We've reported several weeks ago that energy companies are refusing credit to their existing customers for the future because the energy companies don't think their customers are going to survive the winter. So the banks are going to treat these customers in exactly the same way, it
Yeah.
strikes me.
Yeah.
But let's look at the energy price crisis from an alternative direction with our next item, because the EU executive plans to raise about 140 billion euros by imposing windfall taxes on energy companies' abnormally high profits and redirecting proceeds to households and businesses who are struggling with soaring bills. Announcing long-awaited emergency measures to tackle the rising price of electricity, the EU official in charge of the green transition, Frans Timmermans, said the plans were a necessary response to energy supply shortages and high prices. The era of cheap fossil fuels is over, and the faster we move to cheap, clean and homegrown renewables, the sooner we will be immune to Russia's energy blackmail, he said. Fossil fuel extractors will be asked by the EU to give back 33% of taxable surplus profits for the 2022 fiscal year, in a move that could pile pressure on Liz Truss to reverse her decision not to extend the UK's windfall tax on oil and gas companies, which is set at 25%. Truss has ruled out extending the £5 billion windfall tax on energy companies introduced by the former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. In a further sign of the UK's post-Brexit divergence, the new Prime Minister has also stopped short of asking consumers and businesses to reduce their energy use over the winter. In contrast, the Commission wants EU member states to sign up to a legally binding target to cut electricity use by 10% overall and by 5% during peak hours via efficiency campaigns and incentives. The plan mirrors an already agreed voluntary target of cutting gas consumption by 15% until the end of spring 2023. Demand reduction helps rebalance the energy market, lower energy bills, reduce emissions, and makes us immune to Russia's gas games. Without demand reduction, it's not going to work, Timmermans said. So, Maureen, firstly, Frans Timmermans said the era of cheap fossil fuels is over. The faster we move to clean, cheap, and homegrown renewables, the sooner we will be immune to Russia's energy blackmail. That struck me as a bit of a contrast, to the UK government, certainly the Johnson UK government, which clearly doesn't want to move quickly at all, and instead is choosing to build new nuclear power stations.
Yes, I mean, it just shows you the divergence even more between the way Scotland wants to go and the way England is going. And you know, I think I've said before that they just seem to the UK government, things like COP26 seem to have just been a great, PR stunt and not listening to anything that they have said in terms of the commitments that they have made. They're just not interested in fulfilling those and sticking by them. And even the doing away with the green levy temporarily is just completely and utterly the wrong way to go. And we've seen that Scotland and what we want to do seems to be absolutely in line with what they want to do in the EU. So thank goodness that we seem to be on the right path now, while England is, as usual, out of step. But it's not just because of that; it's because people are suffering because of the decisions that the UK government is taking, rather than what the long-term strategy should be, is absolutely reducing energy consumption. And we tend to think of that and what we can do in terms of, switching off lights and things, but we haven't heard anything from the UK government in terms of insulation schemes or anything like that, which is something that would employ hundreds, if not thousands, of people in retrofitting properties. But also, we could come to a situation where there's another 3-day week because of lack of energy supply. And I think what we see in Europe is proactive action ahead of what is likely to happen, rather than last-minute reaction, which we tend to get in so many things from the Westminster government.
Thanks, Maureen. As you say, delayed reactivity and reactionary politics seems to be the hallmark of the Conservative
Mm.
government nowadays. I'd said earlier that the increase or the announcement of a 33% windfall tax by the EU might put pressure on Liz Truss to reverse her decision not to extend the UK's windfall tax, which is set at 25%, but arguably isn't 25%. But I wondered, will it put pressure on Liz Truss? I wondered whether she instinctively would want to do the opposite thing to the EU after Brexit. And also, I say instinctively, what I really mean is she'll do that because that's what the hard right wing owners who bankroll her will tell her to do.
Yeah, I think the word bloody mindedness is maybe what you're looking for, Andrew. But yes, I think we can get a situation where she'll just do the opposite for devilment, if you like, and not looking at what is absolutely needed. But it would be interesting to follow this story and see what the reaction is of these energy companies in terms of what they're having to pay in Europe. And you can't see the EU backing down so much as the UK government will. I mean, the UK government is notorious at backing down and sucking up to the energy companies rather than standing firm in the interests of the population. So I think this is a story that, as you say, Andrew, will probably run. But we've seen that Liz Truss has had to U-turn already on some of the outlandish things that she promised to her own supporters in order to get the job. But just how much U-turning she'll have to do in the next few months will be interesting to watch. But she seems to be so far just totally dogmatic in what she wants to do rather than looking at the reality of things. And while some of our civil servants have been sacked, I feel for the ones that are still there, having to try and work out some sort of coherent policies and strategies that will work. But again, I'm not holding my breath that they're going to work for the vast majority of citizens of the UK.
Thanks, Maureen. You can be sure that if we ever detect a coherent policy out of Westminster, we'll be reporting it here on Broadcasting Scotland. But let's move on to our next item now, because Donald Trump's lawyers are causing irreparable harm to the government and the public by delaying the investigation into his hoarding of highly classified documents at his Florida mansion, the US Department of Justice has said. The claim came in a strongly worded court filing urging a district judge, Aileen Cannon, to reconsider her ruling last week, granting Trump's request for an independent special master in the case. The Department of Justice argued that the order stops it continuing its review of the thousands of documents, some reportedly containing details of a foreign power's nuclear secrets, seized by an FBI search of Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach last month. Federal agents discovered the papers in a basement storage area and a desk drawer, despite assurances from Trump's lawyers that all documents he took with him after leaving the White House in January 2021 had been returned to the National Archives. Markings on the documents signify that their unauthorized disclosure reasonably could be expected to result in damage to the national security, including exceptionally grave damage. Tuesday's Justice Department filing said, adding that a delay would cause irreparable harm. It continued, plaintiff has characterized the government's criminal investigation as a document storage dispute or an overdue library book scenario. In doing so, the plaintiff has not addressed the potential harms that could result from mishandling classified information and the strict requirements imposed by law for handling such documents. Cannon, a Trump appointee to the federal bench, has been widely criticized for the special master ruling, which some have argued places Trump above the law. She has given no indication if or when she will reconsider the order. So, Maureen, The story started with Trump's lawyers being accused of causing irreparable harm. Wouldn't it be simpler just to say that Donald Trump causes irreparable harm to his creditors, to his neighbours at the Meany estate, to folks who enrolled at Trump University, to Mexicans who he branded rapists, to South Koreans who watched Trump become best buddies with Kim Jong-un, and perhaps his personal attorney, Michael Cohen, who was struck off and then went to jail, and maybe perhaps Steve Bannon, who might be headed the same way.
Absolutely, he's caused irreparable damage to so many people throughout the world. But you have to think about the complete fracturing of the US economy that has happened under Trump. I mean, from what you were saying there, Andrew, you get the impression that he's kind of been hoarding documents that he's taken away throughout his tenure of office, and not just in bunches of files at the end of his tenure. And, to have things like documents relating to nuclear activity just seems utterly unbelievable. And I think what you also said was, through the legal system, as I say, how polarized people are in all sections of society, and that Biden and his work and the Department of Justice in their separate work just seem to have to tread so carefully when they're dealing with actions of Trump, rather than their normal routine work. And at every step, he throws spanners in the works, and he at every turn things just get delayed by him. It's what you call, what is it, the theory of chaos, that seems to um, be behind everything that he touches and everything that he does, creating chaos.
Chaos, as you say, and deliberately causing chaos. I cannot disagree with you, Maureen. You're absolutely right. Let's leave Trump now, and let's go to our final item. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam is the title that Edward Fitzgerald gave to his 1859 translation from Persian into English of a selection of quatrains attributed to Omar Khayyam, who had been dubbed the astronomer poet of Persia. Khayyam was famous during his lifetime, not as a poet, but as an astronomer and a mathematician. As a result, the authenticity of the poetry attributed by Fitzgerald to Omar Khayyam is regarded by many as uncertain. If you're interested, the Scottish poet Rab Wilson, who's no relation, has published a Scots version. He published it in 2004. The 71st stanza of the Rubaiyat reads, "The moving finger writes, and, having writ, moves on. Nor all your piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all your tears wash out a word of it." Some say that the moving finger represents the passage of time. Once a moment happens, it is now in the past, and all your cleverness or prayers or tears are unable to pull it back to the present. The point is that once the moment is past, it's gone. Once the moving finger writes, game over. History is fixed, unchangeable. It's also perhaps thought to be related to the idea of time passing, as once something is done, it remains in the past, because time and only time moves forward. So, Maureen, these past few days we've been witnessing the passage of time, and with it events which may or may not signify significant change. I've also heard some commentators who really should know better pad out airtime interminably, talking again and again about John Knox as if Scotland is still in the 16th century, and also saying some pretty shameful things. So, in light of the pageantry that we've been watching these days, or many of us have been watching these days, do you think that this historical pageantry is going to make folks wish for the past and things that are and the past which is in the past? Or is it instead, are we going to see a reaction and folks are going to be encouraged to look to the future?
You don't mind the difficult questions right to the end, Andrew. I don't know, but my perception would be, I mean, it makes me think of my dad, who always said, "I'm not interested in history, I'm only interested in making it." But, you know, I don't share that view. I think we've got to learn from the past, but in many instances, we don't learn from the past. But I thought it was interesting in Northern Ireland yesterday, when the new king was there, that he must have very much, and at least I got the impression that in Ireland, if they were allowed by the unionists, that the population is very interested in moving on, if they can, and learning from their past and not repeating the past. Um, in terms of what the reaction, I mean, how many times do you hear about every anniversary? You still hear about Diana's death, and people now thinking that the reaction's got to be so much better for Queen Elizabeth than it was for Diana or the Queen Mother. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And I think no consideration has been taken of moving things into this century in terms of how these passings should be conducted. So the answer is I dunna ken.
Well, there's no right answer to this final item. I can assure you. When I was looking at it, it struck me that in fact there's a strong resonance between the Rubaiyat, this stanza from the Rubaiyat, and to quote the Corries, "Those days are past now, and in the past they must remain." So that got me thinking about the people of Scotland, and how they regard their past and their future. Do you think that we will see Scots, as a result of, and we've also been hearing some commentators suggesting that the events of the last few days, in some way, are cementing the union? Do you think that Scottish people, reflecting that those days are past now, and reflecting on the words of the Rubaiyat, that the moving finger writes and having writ moves on, do you think Scottish people are going to be encouraged to consider their futures, again in light of the pageantry that we've been seeing playing out on our TV screens and on our radios?
Well, I think the mainstream media have been absolutely awful trying to stir up in the independence debate during this period of mourning. I think it's absolutely reprehensible what they've done, and I think I did see Angus on television the other day, and this is saying this is not the time, and even to her credit, Ruth Davidson saying that this is absolutely not the time. I think that people in Scotland are, contrary to what the mainstream media they are, they're clever, and they can separate saying goodbye to a monarch who has given undoubtedly absolutely amazing service after over a hugely long period of time, and what they want for the country in the future. So it may cement some thinking they want to stay in the union. I think the longer this carries on, I'm not going to say what I think it is. I think the longer this is dragged out, the more it will make people think in the other direction. So yeah, let's watch the space, as they say.
That's a good way to put it, Maureen. I think we're quite close to events at the moment, but once we have a little bit of perspective of time, the moving finger having written and moved on, then we might see wider implications and wider impacts of the way in which the recent events have been handled by politicians and those who are in power in the United Kingdom. But unfortunately, that's all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. To everyone who has donated, And to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work and promotes the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can also find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us then. And that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching this evening, and I would particularly like to thank our special guest this evening, Maureen Watt. Maureen, many thanks. I hope that everyone who's been watching this evening is keeping well.
Thank you.
Please have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.